Imagine you are standing in the dark. It is 2 in the morning. The street behind you has no lights, no sodium glow from lampposts, no ambient brightness from nearby commercial strips, nothing but the cold desert sky and the distant outline of the Santa Catalina Mountains against the horizon. The silence is absolute in the way that desert silence always is, not the absence of sound so much as the presence of a different kind of stillness, one that city people find uncomfortable, and that the residents of this particular neighborhood in the Catalina foothills of northern Tucson have come to think of as normal. You have just left a house, and somewhere inside that house, a small electronic device implanted in the chest of an 84-year-old woman just lost its connection to the phone it was synced with, a pacemaker, gone offline, not because of a battery failure, not because of a medical event, because the woman whose heart it was monitoring is no longer inside the building. She was there, and now she is not, and you are the reason she is gone. You walk away from that house thinking something very specific. You are thinking that you covered every angle. You are thinking that the camera on the front door is dealt with. You put something over the lens, you tried to knock it off, you did what you thought needed to be done. You are thinking that you wore gloves, you wore a mask, you wore clothes that cannot be traced to you. You are thinking that the ransom note you prepared is going to the right places, to the newsrooms, to the outlets that will amplify the demand, and that the Bitcoin address you included in that note is your financial shield, your wall between the money and your identity. You are thinking that Bitcoin is anonymous, that no one can follow it, that you have thought of everything. You have not thought of everything. You have not thought of the fact that the doorbell camera you covered with a leaf from a potted plant on the porch has a backup server, that the technology company behind that camera stores data in redundant cloud systems that operate independently of the device itself, that the FBI, the specific division within the FBI that handles digital evidence recovery, can walk into that back-end infrastructure with a legal order and pull footage that you believed was gone. You have not thought of the fact that the pacemaker that just disconnected from its phone has been logging cardiac data every minute of every hour of every day for years, and that the record it made in the moments before going offline is stored in a server maintained by a medical device manufacturer, and that a federal subpoena can reach that server. You have not thought of the fact that the Bitcoin blockchain, the ledger on which your wallet address exists and on which every transaction you have ever made with that address is permanently recorded, is public, open to anyone, readable by the FBI's entire dedicated cryptocurrency forensics infrastructure, unchangeable, unforgeable, there forever. You believed you were invisible, and the record of everything you did is sitting on a public server, waiting to be read by the agency that has been tracing cryptocurrency in kidnapping cases, terrorism financing operations, and international money laundering schemes for over a decade. That gap between what you believed and what is actually true is the reason this case has not gone cold. It is the reason the FBI, 2 months into an investigation with no named suspect and no confirmed proof of life, says that the Bitcoin trail is their single best lead. It is the reason that former investigators with decades of experience in exactly these kinds of cases say, without hesitation, that the walls are closing, slowly but closing. Tonight, we are going inside all of it, not at the surface level of daily news updates, but at the level of how this investigation actually works, how blockchain forensics actually functions, what the FBI is actually doing right now with a wallet address that has been sitting on a public ledger since the first ransom note arrived at an Arizona newsroom in February 2026, what the DNA laboratory is actually working through, what the pacemaker data actually contains, what the profile of the person behind this crime actually suggests about where the investigation is most likely to find its breakthrough, and what it means for this case, for this family, for the search for an 84-year-old woman who has been gone for over 60 days, that the single most powerful forensic tool in this investigation is a currency that the kidnapper chose because they believed it was their protection. This is the crime files. No sensationalism, no exploitation, just evidence, just analysis, just the pursuit of truth. Let's begin at the beginning. Not the morning Nancy was reported missing, not the first ransom note, not the doorbell footage the FBI released on February 10th. Let's begin at the question that shapes everything. Why was Nancy Guthrie targeted? The answer to that question is not simple, and it matters far more than most coverage has acknowledged, because the answer to why changes everything about who, and who is what this investigation is ultimately about. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has lived in the Catalina foothills for years, a quiet residential neighborhood north of Tucson, built at the foot of the Santa Catalina Mountains. Known for its desert landscape and its privacy, the homes there are substantial. The lots are generous. The vegetation is native: saguaro cactus, palo verde trees, mesquite. creosote bush. The streets in portions of the neighborhood have no artificial lighting. At night, particularly in the darker stretches away from main roads, the darkness is genuine and complete. Nancy lives alone. She attends church. She watches church services live-streamed online on Sunday mornings with a friend, a routine so reliable that when she failed to appear for the service on February 1st, that absence was immediately noticed and immediately reported. She takes daily medication for her heart condition. She has a pacemaker. She has difficulty walking. She is, by every external measure, a private person living a quiet and structured life in a beautiful but isolated residential setting. She is also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television for over a decade. A lawyer, a journalist, a broadcaster whose professional history, compensation level, and family connections are all matters of public record, accessible with enough patience and the right databases to anyone who wants to know. Someone wanted to know, and that someone, at some point before January 2026, acquired that knowledge and made a decision based on it. The decision was this: that Nancy Guthrie, as the elderly, medically vulnerable, privately living mother of a nationally prominent television personality, represented an ideal leverage point, not a target of opportunity, not a random victim, a specific, researched, calculated target whose connection to a family with significant financial resources made her valuable in a way that her own circumstances, living alone, without caregivers, without visible security personnel, made her accessible. That calculation required information. It required someone to identify Savannah Guthrie as a target, or rather, to identify Nancy Guthrie as the target accessible through Savannah Guthrie. It required knowing where Nancy lived, what her routines were, what her security situation was, what vulnerabilities existed in the physical layout of her home and its surrounding neighborhood. None of that information is the kind you acquire passively. It comes from active research, from time spent building a picture of a specific person in a specific location. Investigators identified January 11, 2026 as one of three critical dates in this case, alongside January 31st and February 1st. On or around January 11th, surveillance footage appears to show a masked individual at or near Nancy's property. The full details of what was captured that day have not been publicly disclosed, but the presence of a masked figure at that location 3 full weeks before the abduction is consistent with one interpretation: reconnaissance. Someone visiting the site to observe, to assess, to understand the environment they plan to operate in. 3 weeks of patience. 3 weeks between the surveillance visit and the operation itself. That patience is one of the most significant characteristics of this case. Random crimes do not include a 3-week reconnaissance phase. Crimes of passion do not include a 3-week reconnaissance phase. Crimes committed by professional organizations often do include one, but professional criminal organizations also tend not to make the specific kinds of errors that are present in this case's record. The 3-week gap suggests planning, and the planning suggests someone who approached this the way an intelligent, self-directed person approaches a complex problem they have never actually solved before, with preparation, with research, with a confidence in their own plan that was not calibrated against the reality of what professional investigators actually know and can actually do. That profile has a name in law enforcement analysis. Before we get to the Bitcoin, before we get to the forensic details, I need you to understand this profile completely, because it explains every seemingly contradictory element in this case simultaneously. Law enforcement analysts, behavioral investigators, and criminologists who study non-professional kidnappers have documented a recurring pattern across decades of kidnapping cases. The pattern involves intelligent individuals, people with above-average research capabilities, analytical thinking, and planning discipline, who commit serious crimes based on preparation derived entirely from secondary sources: articles, online forums, news coverage of other cases, the cultural mythology that surrounds certain types of crime. These individuals do not have criminal networks. They do not have mentors who have done this before. They do not have any mechanism for testing their assumptions against reality before acting on them. The result is a profile that is genuinely paradoxical. These individuals are capable of sophisticated planning, identifying the right target, the right timing, the right approach, while simultaneously making tactical errors that any experienced criminal operative would immediately recognize as dangerous. They carry weapons they do not know how to use. They choose financial mechanisms based on myths about those mechanisms. They communicate through channels that are immediately and obviously exposed to law enforcement. They believe at every stage that their preparation was sufficient, because they have never actually tested it, and because the secondary sources they relied on were themselves wrong about the things that matter most. This profile is sometimes called the informed amateur. The term is not a formal diagnostic category. It is a practical description of a pattern that investigators encounter regularly enough to have named. And the informed amateur is, in some counterintuitive ways, a more dangerous adversary than the career criminal, not because they are more capable. They are less capable, but because they are less predictable. Career criminals follow established patterns. Informed amateurs improvise. And improvisation, while it creates vulnerabilities, also creates uncertainty for investigators who are trained to recognize established criminal methodologies. But here is what makes the informed amateur ultimately more forensically vulnerable than the professional. Their errors are systematic. They derive from the same source, the reliance on secondary knowledge rather than experiential knowledge, and they cluster around the same categories of mistake. Every tactical error in this case is an error of assumption. The assumption that covering a camera with a plant leaf is sufficient. The assumption that carrying a gun in an improvised holster is equivalent to being armed. The assumption that sending ransom notes to newsrooms is a secure method of communication. And the assumption that Bitcoin is anonymous. All of those assumptions were wrong, and they were wrong in the same fundamental way, because the person who made them acquired their understanding of those tools from sources that did not tell them how those tools actually perform in a professional investigative environment. They understood the simplified version. They did not understand what the simplified version leaves out. And what it leaves out is everything the FBI knows. Now let's talk about the ransom notes in detail, because the specifics of how those notes were constructed, delivered, and how they behaved from a forensic standpoint matter enormously. Within 72 hours of the initial missing persons report on February 1st, multiple Arizona news organizations began receiving communications. KOLD News 13 in Tucson received one. Another local outlet received one. TMZ, the celebrity news and entertainment publication that reaches tens of millions of readers, received one. These were not messages sent to the Guthrie family directly. They were sent to media institutions, to organizations with established relationships with law enforcement, with legal obligations around evidence, with communication staff trained to preserve and report exactly the kind of material being sent to them. That choice of delivery mechanism is itself a data point in the informed amateur profile. A professional kidnapping operation, the kind run by organized criminal groups in Mexico, in South America, in Eastern Europe, does not send ransom notes to newsrooms. It establishes a private channel of communication with the family, typically through a trusted intermediary, and negotiates entirely outside the public eye. The absence of that kind of established methodology in this case is not incidental. It is diagnostic. It tells investigators something specific about who is not behind this crime, which narrows the field of who might be. The first note reportedly set a deadline of 5 in the afternoon on February 5th. The ransom demand, according to subsequent reporting, was $6 million. In Bitcoin. The note included a specific wallet address to which the funds were to be sent. A second note established a revised deadline of February 9th at 5 in the afternoon. A third note arrived at TMZ, different in character, apparently from a different author than the original two, offering information about the kidnapper's identity in exchange for 1 Bitcoin, approximately $70,000 at the time. On February 4th, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released a public video. She addressed whoever was responsible directly. She said the family was ready to talk. She asked for proof of life. 3 days later, on February 7th, in a second video, Savannah said 3 words that have since been dissected in every analysis of this case. "We will pay." Both deadlines passed without a confirmed payment through official channels. Both passed without a confirmed communication establishing proof of life. And yet, on February 10th, activity was detected in the Bitcoin wallet included in the ransom notes. A transaction, recorded, timestamped, permanent, placed on the public blockchain at approximately 5 in the afternoon, Arizona time. From that moment, the FBI had a live forensic thread, not a hint, not a theory, a transaction on a permanent public ledger connected to a crime they were actively investigating, and the work of following that thread began immediately. Now I need to spend real time explaining what that work actually involves, because the public conversation about Bitcoin traceability in this case has been simultaneously too simplified and too shallow. The reality is more technically detailed and more forensically powerful than most coverage has conveyed, and understanding it is essential to understanding why the FBI's confidence in this lead is justified. Bitcoin is not anonymous. This is not a matter of debate among people who understand cryptocurrency. It is a factual statement about how the technology functions. Bitcoin is pseudonymous, which means that wallet addresses, not names, appear in the transaction record. But that distinction, the difference between anonymous and pseudonymous, is the difference between a currency that is forensically untraceable and a currency that is, as one expert in this case put it, the ultimate crime scene. Here is the technical reality. The Bitcoin blockchain is a distributed public ledger. Every Bitcoin transaction that has ever occurred, going back to January 3rd, 2009, the date of the first Bitcoin transaction in history, is recorded on this ledger. The ledger is maintained simultaneously by thousands of computers around the world. No single entity controls it. No single entity can modify it. No single entity can delete entries from it. A transaction recorded in 2009 is precisely as accessible today as it was the day it was made. A transaction made this morning will be equally accessible in 50 years, in 100 years, for as long as the network exists. Every wallet address on the Bitcoin network has a complete, publicly readable transaction history. Every Bitcoin that has ever entered or left that address is recorded. Every address that address has ever transacted with is recorded. The amounts, the timestamps, the sequence of every transfer, all of it is on the blockchain. All of it is public. All of it is permanent. What the blockchain does not display automatically is the real-world identity of the person controlling an address. An address is a string of characters. It does not say your name. It does not say where you live. This is what people describe as Bitcoin's anonymity, and it is precisely this feature, the gap between the address and the identity, that blockchain forensics exists to close. Here is how that gap gets closed. Every wallet has a history that extends beyond the blockchain itself. Wallets are created using software that runs on a device with a hardware identity, that connects through an internet service with a network identity, that was downloaded from a platform that may have account records associated with it. Wallets are funded from somewhere, from an exchange, from another person, from a transaction that connects the wallet to a real-world financial interaction. And wallets interact with the broader financial ecosystem every time their holder attempts to convert Bitcoin into goods, services, or traditional currency. Each one of those interaction points is a potential connection between the pseudonymous address and a real human identity. And blockchain forensics is the systematic methodology of identifying and following those connections. Ari Redbord is the global head of policy at TRM Labs, one of the most sophisticated blockchain analytics firms in the world, working directly with the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Treasury Department, and law enforcement agencies across multiple continents. He spoke specifically about this case. He said that any time a cryptocurrency address is involved in a criminal investigation, it is an immediate lead. He explained that every transaction on the public blockchain is traceable, trackable, and immutable, meaning it exists permanently and cannot be altered. And then he said something that cuts to the heart of why this lead matters. Investigators can go back in time and look at what transactions occurred prior to the day involving the specific cryptocurrency address in question. That statement deserves to be unpacked fully, because it reveals a dimension of this investigation that most coverage has not explored. The Ransom wallet, the Bitcoin address included in the notes sent to Arizona newsrooms, did not come into existence on the day those notes were written. Bitcoin wallets are created in advance of their use, and every transaction that wallet has ever been involved in, from the moment it was first used, through every interaction it has had with other addresses or with any financial platform, to the current moment, is on the blockchain and accessible to investigators. If that wallet was funded from another wallet before the ransom demand was made, if someone transferred Bitcoin into the ransom address as part of their operational preparation, that funding transaction is on the blockchain. The address it came from is visible, and that source address has its own history, its own connections, its own potential links to a real-world identity. If the ransom wallet has ever interacted with a regulated cryptocurrency exchange, any exchange that maintains Know Your Customer records under financial regulations, the identity of the account holder associated with that interaction may already exist in a database. This is what Redbord meant when he said investigators can go back in time. They are not just watching what happens to the money after the crime. They are reconstructing the complete financial history of the criminal's cryptocurrency activity, before the crime, during the crime, and after. Every decision the person made about Bitcoin, potentially going back years, is available for review. And TRM Labs tools, which the FBI uses, associate specific cryptocurrency addresses with known threat actors, terrorist financiers, sanctioned entities, ransomware operators, previous criminal investigations, allowing investigators to immediately flag any connection between the ransom wallet and any previously identified criminal address in the global blockchain record. Northeastern University cryptocurrency expert Ravi Sarathy described the investigative methodology in greater technical detail. He explained that investigators use what are called transaction graph techniques, algorithms that map the complete network of relationships between addresses across the full blockchain, identifying clustering patterns, address reuse, characteristic spending behaviors, and associations between wallets that appear to be controlled by the same entity. These techniques are probabilistic, Sarathy noted. Each data point narrows the field of possible identities. Each additional transaction adds resolution to the picture. Over time, with enough data points and enough connections between the digital record and the real-world financial system, the analysis converges on specific individuals with increasing certainty. He said, over time, you get closer and closer to identifying these people. That is not a vague statement. It is a precise description of how this methodology has worked repeatedly in cases against suspects who attempted sophisticated evasion. Caitlin Boring, a cryptocurrency industry expert, stated the conclusion plainly. The blockchain is a public ledger that is free for anyone to audit. There is no way to hide those tracks. This is actually an incredibly powerful tool for law enforcement. In fact, it's a way better tool for law enforcement than it is for criminals. A better tool for law enforcement than for criminals. The mechanism the kidnapper chose as their shield is, by the assessment of people who work with it every day, better suited to finding them than to protecting them. Let's talk about evasion, because the kidnapper, or whoever is advising them, may have attempted to use the tools that cryptocurrency criminals use to obscure their trails. And it is important to understand why those tools have failed consistently in cases where federal law enforcement has been the investigative authority. The most commonly discussed evasion technique in cryptocurrency crime is the mixer, sometimes called a tumbler. A mixing service pools Bitcoin from multiple users, combines the funds, and distributes equivalent amounts to new addresses, creating a cloud of transactions designed to make it difficult to trace which input corresponds to which output. For several years, mixers were promoted in criminal and privacy-focused communities as a definitive solution to Bitcoin's traceability. The federal government's response was systematic. In 2023, the Department of Justice charged the founders of ChipMixer with money laundering and seized the platform along with $46 million in Bitcoin. ChipMixer was one of the largest and longest-running Bitcoin mixing services in operation. In 2024, the founders of Samurai Wallet, another major mixing service, were arrested on federal charges of money laundering and unlicensed money transmitting. Their platform was seized. The servers were taken. The transaction history was added to the forensic record. The Department of Justice has made the disruption of cryptocurrency mixing infrastructure a consistent enforcement priority. And in parallel with those enforcement actions, the forensic techniques for identifying mixer patterns, the timing signatures, the characteristic fee structures, the distribution algorithms that leave recognizable fingerprints in the blockchain record have advanced to the point where many mixing transactions are now identifiable in the analysis. The second major evasion technique is conversion to privacy coins, cryptocurrencies like Monero that incorporate built-in anonymization features at the protocol level. Monero transactions are significantly harder to trace than Bitcoin transactions. But the act of converting Bitcoin to Monero is itself a transaction that occurs on or through an exchange, and the exchanges that facilitate this conversion are increasingly regulated under Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering requirements. The conversion is a data point. The exchange interaction is a data point, and the FBI's forensic capability with privacy coins, while less comprehensive than with Bitcoin directly, has improved substantially in recent years as these currencies have become more frequently used in criminal contexts. The third technique, cascading Bitcoin through a long chain of intermediate wallets, creating dozens or hundreds of hops in rapid succession, is precisely the problem that automated blockchain analysis platforms were built to solve. The software does not get tired. It does not lose count. It traces every hop simultaneously, maps every node in the transaction graph, and builds a complete picture of the full network that human analysts then review and interpret. A chain of 50 hops that would take a human investigator weeks to trace manually is mapped by automated analysis software in seconds. The length of the chain is not a meaningful protection against this methodology. There is a fourth technique worth understanding, because it is the one that has the most psychological appeal to someone who has researched cryptocurrency crime from secondary sources. The technique is called chain hopping, moving funds across multiple different cryptocurrencies in sequence, with the goal of breaking the forensic trail at each conversion point. Bitcoin to Monero to Ethereum to some other token, through exchanges that may operate with varying levels of regulatory oversight. This technique exploits the fact that different blockchains have different forensic accessibility and that international exchanges operate under different legal frameworks. Chain hopping is real. It is used, and it is increasingly ineffective against the combination of blockchain analytics tools that can track funds across multiple blockchain networks simultaneously, legal mutual assistance processes that reach exchanges in most major jurisdictions, and the growing number of countries that have implemented Know Your Customer requirements for cryptocurrency exchanges under international anti-money laundering frameworks. The Financial Action Task Force, an intergovernmental body that sets international standards for anti-money laundering compliance, has specifically addressed cryptocurrency traceability in its guidance, and most developed countries have implemented that guidance in their domestic regulatory frameworks. The conclusion of every blockchain forensics expert who has spoken about this case is the same. There is no evasion technique currently accessible to a non-state criminal actor that reliably defeats the combination of modern blockchain forensics, federal subpoena authority, and international law enforcement cooperation. The FBI can follow the money. They have demonstrated this in case after case. In 2021, the Justice Department recovered 63.7 of the 75 Bitcoin paid as ransom in the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. The attackers were sophisticated enough to compromise a major piece of American energy infrastructure. The FBI traced the Bitcoin payment through multiple hops, identified the wallet where the funds were stored, and obtained the private key to recover the funds. The entire process, from payment to recovery, took weeks. In 2022, Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan were arrested in connection with the theft of 119,754 Bitcoin from the Bitfinex cryptocurrency exchange in 2016. They had held those funds for 6 years. They had attempted to launder them through thousands of transactions across multiple wallets and platforms. The FBI traced the funds through the entire 6-year chain of attempted obfuscation and charged both individuals with money laundering. The Bitcoin was seized, the arrests were made. 6 years of laundering undone. The blockchain remembers everything, always. Now I want to examine something that has received insufficient attention in the public coverage of this case, and that connects the Bitcoin trail to the broader forensic picture in a way that illuminates the investigation's full architecture. The transaction that occurred in the Ransom wallet on February 10th, the activity detected at approximately 5 in the afternoon, Arizona time, was not the only cryptocurrency event connected to this case. A third ransom note arrived at TMZ. This one from what appeared to be a different author than the original 2 notes. This note requested 1 Bitcoin, approximately $70,000 at the time, not as ransom payment, but as payment for information about the identity of the kidnappers. This note cited a different Bitcoin address than the ones in the original ransom communications. That third address is now also part of the forensic record. Its history is on the blockchain. Its connections to other addresses are readable. And the question of whether it was created by someone with genuine knowledge of the abduction or by an opportunist attempting to profit from the coverage of a high-profile case is one that blockchain forensics analysis can potentially help answer. If the third address has any transaction history connecting it to the first 2 addresses, that connection is on the blockchain and visible to investigators. If it has no such connection and its history suggests a pattern consistent with an opportunistic fraud, that is also readable in the record. Multiple addresses, multiple potential threads, each one a node in a network that the FBI has been mapping since February. The DNA evidence creates a completely parallel investigative thread that could independently resolve the identity question in this case. Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly that DNA was recovered from the scene at Nancy's home. He described it precisely as a biological puzzle, a mixed sample containing multiple DNA profiles that must be separated through laboratory analysis before any comparison to a suspect database can be made. He acknowledged the process takes months. He acknowledged it must be conducted with extraordinary care to preserve the evidentiary integrity of the sample for use in court proceedings that have not yet begun, but that the entire investigation is building toward. The mixed nature of the sample, multiple contributors present in the same physical evidence, is forensically significant in both directions. It complicates the analysis timeline, but it also potentially provides multiple profiles, each of which is independently useful. If the sample contains DNA from more than one person involved in the abduction, then a single successful profile separation and database match is not the only possible path to identification. Multiple profiles mean multiple potential threads to pull, and the database comparison itself may not be the limiting factor. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore has demonstrated, across dozens of cold cases resolved over the past decade, that DNA profiles from crime scenes do not need to match a suspect's own entry in a law enforcement database to be investigatively useful. They need only to match a relative, a cousin, a sibling, a parent, a grandparent, Who has submitted genetic information to a consumer genealogy database? Platforms like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA have collected the genetic profiles of tens of millions of Americans. The familial matching technique, which identifies relatives of a suspect through partial DNA profile matches in those databases, then uses genealogical research to trace forward through family trees to a generation and a geography consistent with the crime, has successfully identified suspects in cases that had gone unsolved for 30 and 40 years. In 2018, this technique was used to identify Joseph James DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer, a suspect who had evaded identification for 4 decades. In 2019, it was used in the resolution of the Tanya Van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook murders, a case dormant since 1987. In 2021, it was central to the identification of Rex Hoyerman as the suspected Gilgo Beach killer. Case after case, the familial DNA methodology has worked against suspects who had no criminal record, no prior DNA sample in any law enforcement database, no visible connection to previous investigations. If the separated DNA profiles from Nancy Guthrie's home are uploaded to the genealogy databases used by investigators for familial matching, the suspect does not need to have ever been arrested. They do not need to have ever submitted a voluntary sample. They need only to have a biological relative, anywhere in their family tree, who participated in a consumer genetic service. The methodology does the rest. 2 threads: the blockchain and the DNA, moving toward the same answer from 2 completely different scientific domains, using 2 completely different investigative methodologies, driven by 2 completely different teams of specialists. The convergence of those threads, the moment when the blockchain analysis and the genetic genealogy analysis both begin pointing at the same person, is the moment this case becomes a prosecution. The pacemaker is a 3rd thread that has received almost no serious analytical attention in the public coverage of this case, and it deserves more. Nancy Guthrie's cardiac device is a medical instrument, yes, but it is also a data recording and transmission system. Modern pacemakers are sophisticated electronic devices. They monitor cardiac rhythm continuously. They log data about every heartbeat, the rate, the regularity, the detection of arrhythmias or other abnormal patterns. They record the timing of events that exceed normal parameters. They transmit data to monitoring applications via Bluetooth. They sync that data to servers maintained by the device manufacturer and the cardiac monitoring service that manages the patient's ongoing care. And they store a local data history on the device itself. When the pacemaker disconnected from Nancy's phone at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, that disconnection was logged, but the data the device had been recording in the minutes before that disconnection was also logged. The cardiac history of those final minutes inside the house, the record of what happened to Nancy Guthrie's heart between the moment of confrontation and the moment she was moved out of Bluetooth range, exists. It is in the device's local storage. It is in the backup records maintained by the manufacturer. It is in the server logs of the cardiac monitoring service. And it is in the application data on the phone that the pacemaker was paired with, assuming that phone has been recovered and analyzed by investigators. What that data might reveal depends on what happened in those final minutes. Extreme cardiac stress events, the kind associated with fear, with physical confrontation, with the physiological response to being forcibly removed from your home, leave signatures in cardiac monitoring data that medical professionals and forensic cardiologists can interpret. The data does not describe events in words, but it records what happened to the heart of the person at the center of those events, minute by minute, in precise physiological detail. That record is part of the forensic picture. It has been since February 1st. And investigators who know where to look and have the legal authority to access it have access to a physiological timeline of what happened in that house that no witness and no security camera could have provided. Alongside all of these forensic threads runs a set of physical evidence investigations that are slower and less technologically dramatic, but that are equally active. The Ozark Trail Backpack, a specific commercial product identified from the doorbell footage with enough precision that investigators were able to name the exact make and model. A 25-liter hiking pack sold through major retail chains, Walmart, Target, Amazon, at consumer prices. Every retail transaction for that specific model in the Tucson area and surrounding region, going back through the months before February 2026, is a potential data point traceable through purchase records, loyalty card data, credit card transactions, and online order histories. The gloves, the jacket. Whatever vehicle transported Nancy from the neighborhood in the dark hours of February 1st, a vehicle that entered the Catalina foothills from somewhere, moved through streets that other cameras may have captured at angles not yet reviewed, and departed in a direction that the thousands of hours of surveillance footage under ongoing review may eventually document. The FBI specifically requested in April 2026 that residents of the greater Tucson area review their security footage again, not just from February 1st, but from January, from the vicinity of January 11th, from any date when an unfamiliar person or vehicle moved through or near the Catalina foothills in a manner that struck a resident as unusual. Every frame of footage that has not yet been examined is a potential data point. Every camera on every home in that neighborhood, and in the surrounding streets, and on the routes between the neighborhood and the major roads that connect it to the rest of Tucson. Each of those cameras potentially captured something. The work of finding out which ones captured something useful is patient, systematic, and ongoing. The investigation's handling in its earliest hours has been a subject of serious public scrutiny in April 2026. A law enforcement insider, someone with first-hand knowledge of the investigation's early phase, spoke anonymously with NewsNation correspondent Brian Enton and made an allegation that has since become central to the public conversation about this case. The insider said that the detectives initially assigned to the scene were not experienced homicide investigators. They said the supervisor placed over the homicide unit at the time of Nancy's disappearance had allegedly never investigated a homicide before being placed in that role. They described what they characterized as a meaningful experience gap in the initial response to a crime scene of extraordinary complexity and public significance. Sheriff Chris Nanos responded on April 3rd with a direct and detailed public defense of his team. He said his sergeant had been supervising homicides for over 2 years and had resolved significant, high-profile cases in that time. He named cases. He said that undermining the investigation publicly is not just unhelpful, but harmful to the outcome. He defended his personnel without qualification and without apparent uncertainty. The institutional dispute between the insider's account and the sheriff's public position is not something this investigation can resolve. What it can observe is the forensic reality that underlies both positions. The first hours of a crime scene investigation are not recoverable. Whatever happened in those hours, what was processed, what was collected, what protocols were followed in the handling of physical and biological evidence is now part of the permanent investigative record. The mixed DNA sample that the sheriff himself described as a biological puzzle was collected in those hours. The chain of custody that governs that sample's evidentiary usefulness in any eventual prosecution was established in those hours. The initial documentation of the scene, the photographs, the measurements, the mapping of evidence positions was done in those hours. These observations are not accusations. They are forensic context, and in a case of this complexity and this public significance, that context matters. What is not in dispute is the current state of the investigation. It is a full federal joint operation. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI are working together through a dedicated task force. The full weight of federal forensic and investigative authority, blockchain analytics, genetic genealogy expertise, digital evidence recovery capabilities, federal subpoena authority extending to technology companies, exchanges, and platforms in multiple jurisdictions is engaged. The investigation will not be closed until Nancy Guthrie is located or every available lead has been pursued to its conclusion. As of the first week of April 2026, the publicly confirmed facts are these. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 63 days. She is 84 years old. She depends on a pacemaker and daily cardiac medication. She has difficulty walking. There is no confirmed proof of life since her disappearance. No suspect has been publicly named. No arrest has been made. The family has offered a $1 million reward for information leading to her recovery, in addition to the FBI's own reward offer. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has stated publicly and repeatedly that the investigation remains active. Savannah Guthrie, who stepped away from the Today Show immediately following her mother's disappearance, including giving up her role co-hosting the coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics, announced that she would return to the program on April 6th. In her first public interview since the abduction, broadcast on NBC, she described what this has cost her family. She talked about the fear that her mother was targeted because of her. She said to her mother, through a camera and whatever distance separates them, "It's too much to bear to think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me. And I just want to say, I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry." Those words were said publicly, on national television, to a woman who may or may not have been in a position to hear them. The weight of that possibility, that Nancy Guthrie is somewhere, alive, and was not able to hear her daughter's apology, is the weight this case carries every day that it remains unresolved. Now I want to ask the question directly, the one that everyone following this story has been asking since February. If Bitcoin is this traceable, if the FBI is this capable, if this entire forensic apparatus is working in real time, why, after more than 60 days, Has there been no arrest? The answer requires understanding something about forensic investigations that news coverage consistently misrepresents. Speed is not the primary measure of investigative quality. The primary measure is certainty. The FBI is not building a case that results in a press conference. They are building a case that results in a conviction. And a conviction requires evidence that is not just pointing in the right direction, but that is legally sufficient, forensically sound, and capable of surviving the scrutiny of a federal prosecution. Every step in the blockchain forensic analysis requires legal authorization. Subpoenas must be drafted, reviewed, approved by judges, and served. Exchanges and technology companies have legal teams and response timelines. International legal assistance processes, essential when exchanges operate in foreign jurisdictions, involve treaty frameworks, diplomatic channels, and coordination between agencies in multiple countries. These processes take time, weeks, sometimes months, and they must be completed correctly to preserve the evidentiary value of what they produce. If the kidnapper has not yet moved the Bitcoin, if the funds are sitting in the original Ransom wallet, untouched, then the blockchain trail currently stops at that address. The FBI can see the wallet. They can see its history. But without an exchange interaction, without a conversion or withdrawal, the direct connection between the address and a human identity requires additional investigative work from other threads. The DNA, the surveillance footage, the human intelligence network. This is not a failure of the investigation. It is the investigation functioning as designed. Multiple threads, each advancing independently, each moving toward a convergence that will be the moment the case breaks open. And here is the thing about the Bitcoin that is most important to understand. Every day that passes without the kidnapper moving those funds is a day they are holding money they cannot access. They can see the Bitcoin in the wallet. They know the value. They know why they risked everything to acquire it, and they cannot touch it. Every time they consider moving it, every time the pressure of holding inaccessible funds becomes acute enough that action seems necessary, the awareness that the FBI is watching that wallet stops them, or it should stop them. If they act anyway, the act creates a transaction, and the transaction is the lead the FBI has been waiting. There is a psychological dimension to this situation that former investigators describe with remarkable consistency. The person holding ransom funds they cannot safely spend is not in a comfortable position. They are in a position that combines the anxiety of an active federal investigation, the weight of knowledge about a serious crime, the pressure of funds that represent the entire motivation for the risk they took and that they cannot access, and the uncertainty, the constant, unresolvable uncertainty of not knowing what the investigation has found, which camera caught them, whether someone in their circle has already spoken to investigators. Former FBI agent Jason Pack described this dynamic to Parade magazine with a precision that is worth repeating in full. He said, "They do not know which camera caught them. They do not know who has already talked. That uncertainty is exhausting." And then he said the thing that former investigators say when they have seen this pattern resolve, case after case, in the same direction. The walls close slowly in these cases, but they always close. Four walls, moving toward the same point. The blockchain wall mapping every transaction permanently on a public ledger that the FBI reads in real time. The DNA wall, a laboratory separating biological profiles from a mixed sample with patience and precision that cannot be rushed but will not be stopped. The human intelligence wall, $1 million available to the first person in the circle of knowledge who decides that their loyalty to the crime is worth less than that sum plus their own freedom. And the physical evidence wall, investigators working frame by frame through thousands of hours of footage, tracing a commercial backpack through retail records, following cell tower data and vehicle movement patterns and digital signatures through every intersection in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood. Four walls, all of them closing. The person who stood on a dark street in Tucson, Arizona at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, and walked away believing they were invisible, they designed, without knowing it, an inescapable position. They chose a currency that cannot be secretly held forever. They left biological evidence at the scene that a laboratory is separating right now. They used a commercial backpack distinctive enough to be identified from security camera footage and traceable through retail records. They sent written communications to newsrooms that preserved and transmitted those communications to law enforcement immediately. They interfered with a camera that had a back-end server they did not know about, and the FBI recovered everything that camera recorded. And they left behind a pacemaker reading, a physiological record of the final moments before an 84-year-old woman's life was upended, stored in a medical device database, waiting for the legal process that makes it part of the forensic file. Somewhere, right now, Nancy Guthrie's family is waiting. Savannah Guthrie returned to a television studio on April 6th, not because she has found peace with what happened, but because the search continues whether she is on camera or not, and because the world keeps moving even when the people in it are carrying unbearable weight. The family's $1 million reward has been active since February 24th. The FBI's reward has been active since the beginning. The blockchain is being read. The laboratory is working. The walls are moving. They close slowly, but they always close. This isn't just a story. It's a real life, a real family, and a case that may still have answers waiting to be found. The search for truth continues.